Cindy.
Hey, Greg. Hey, first, I wondered if you could talk about the last thing we did yesterday, like that protocol and, where we were.
I don't remember.
Oh, the last thing we did yesterday, you had us do the oneness with our favorite.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand that a little bit more. And
Sure.
if you don't mind, just go over the protocol, because I just did it. I didn't write it down.
What was your experience? I'm curious.
Oh my gosh, it was very, very relaxing.
Very
And
relaxing. Yeah.
I did it with jasmine ointment because
Oh, yeah.
that's all I had. And I love that smell of jasmine.
Right.
And it was kind of like I'm falling in love with that oil.
Right.
It was really, really good.
Oh, good. So, yeah. So what we did, that's actually tied to an alchemical practice. And, part of alchemy is, the idea is that sometimes that people they take this item and then they turn it to gold or whatever. And it's alchemy is an inner practice. It's an inner art. And a lot of times what you're doing is you're using objects or images that you you could say integrate, but it is really more about having a sort of oneness with the image and then how it changes you. And it really is tied to tapping into the intuitive part of the mind. The intuitive part of the mind doesn't see details the way our everyday mind sees. And our body actually doesn't really communicate verbally, like how we're communicating right now. It communicates through symbolism, metaphors and symbolism. And so when you sit and you start to work with an item or an image, like if you're being devotional to a deity or spiritual teacher or anything of that nature, there's a certain degree of oneness. As you start to have oneness, it starts to not just affect you emotionally, mentally, but it also starts to affect your physiology. It starts to shift your physiology. And in a way, you could say it's tied to what they call being born again in the Christian tradition. It's tied to something falls away and something new is born, you could say. And the thing that's new that is born is you're bringing into form aspects of the soul, right? You're bringing into the form of the mind, the form of the emotions, the form of the body. And so even if you look at the idea of healing, when we were talking about yesterday, symptom-oriented treatments is good, but there's no connection to the situation, the person, the condition, to the body when you're very symptom-oriented in the approach. And so when somebody is able to do very deep healing or you could say produce a miraculous healing, is that there has to be a certain degree of oneness by the practitioner and then sometimes even by the patient. And so in the patient, you would say that they're just being conductive to the healing or the potential of what's happening, which is true. Somebody who's regardless if it's orthodox medicine or holistic medicine or ceremonial medicine, if they're not open to it, it kind of doesn't happen. Even with taking a pharmaceutical, people can be just I don't know about that, and just be really resistant to doing it, and it still won't quite work the way that it should. And so this idea is to have a certain degree of oneness with the item. And when you're starting to do with the old alchemist would sit and look at lead and and have a certain degree of oneness with lead, like, a hunk of lead, for example. And, you would think like, why would you want to do that? Why not do something nice? Why not do something fancy? And again, if you look at the aspects of creative destruction, it is this aspect of where it's a play between essence and form, and in a way you could say it's a kind of conflict, right? These things are not the same. They're playing back and forth, and when they're fluid they produce phenomenon, but they are kind of in a way at odds with each other, right? And so if you look at nature, the way predators hunt prey, the way plants are struggling for water and nutrients, and like everything's a little bit at odds with each other. And so the idea of alchemy is to openly welcome or embrace the like, say here we're looking at this item, this is made out of silver. And so you would look at it, and in a way, there's parts of you that like it, and there's parts of you that are resistant to it, like that are pushing away from it. And so the more that you can have a certain degree of oneness to it, the more that it kind of causes a reaction in your physiology, your emotions, your mind. And so what the alchemist would do is they would take the time to figure out what is going to produce certain kind of results in me, right? So it wasn't that like ingesting lead was going to do something, but they would take in lead the way that we were talking about yesterday with that plant. And then the chain reaction is it causes your body, your energy body, to start transmuting something. Like lead literally induces a transmutation state. And so then when you're in this state, regardless of what starts to happen, with other people, with situations, with things that are happening to you, your body's just in this transmutation state, right? So the Christian version of this is, you could even say, like, forgiveness. Like, forgiveness isn't just like, oh, you should forgive and let go what that person did. It is actually an act of transmutation. The Ming Men, which is lower transmutation, the back heart, which is emotional transmutation, and the crown, which is mental transmutation. And that's just one of the transmutation processes. And so by sitting and having a certain degree of oneness with the lead, it's like it stimulates these processes within you, right? And so then if you take it and you do it with like a spiritual teacher or spiritual image, like, you have a Tonka on the wall, or a poster of, Christ or Katumi or Rama, or, whatever it might be. And you sit and you do that same kind of practice, like you're integrating it, and then it starts to change your mind, it starts to change your emotion, it starts to change your physiology so that you become more conductive, and you're almost setting the blueprint for greater soul contact or greater soul involvement. You're disengaging from the lower nature, and you're engaging in something that's more divine, you could say. And so you could do that same idea, that same practice with a spiritual image, but here we did it with a plant. And so with a plant, again, you're taking in the symbolism of the plant, you're taking in the energy of the plant, and you're becoming really super conductive to the plant by having that certain degree of oneness. And you could say almost that the plant begins communicating with you. Like it has like a series of pieces of information that is not just like, this is the property this plant does. It also has like a series of communications. These are aspects of God. And not only is the plant emanate a certain kind of energy, when one is conductive, there's a certain kind of divine energy that flows through the plant. And so by going through and doing the practice of practicing this level or degree of oneness with the plant, you have a deeper connection with it. You open up a kind of communication with it. You kind of know what it's going to do, and what it possibly can do and what it can't. And You could say the practice of being conductive to plants or even to stones increases your ability to draw in nature spirits to get things done in the everyday world, because you are practicing in a very loving way a connection with nature spirits by working with the plant or working with the nature spirit. So it changes your perspective or your attitude towards nature spirits that is usually very, very unconscious. But we kind of treat nature spirits like the cleaning staff. Like, you don't really acknowledge them, you don't really pay attention to them, you don't really think they're there, you don't think they're a thing. Every once in a while we think about it and then we don't think about it, but they're very much tied to our spiritual growth, our spiritual evolution, our ability to activate the heart, and even to connect to the divine is tied to our ability to interact with the nature spirits and the ability to, you could say, increase their conductivity, right? And so by going through and doing this, it makes the plant more potent. It makes your ability to use the plant in ways that are more than just something symptom oriented, because the plants kind of have like a personality, like a person. And so it's a lot like getting to know the plant. Like, you get to know like the personality and the traits, rather than just like it's good for these set of symptoms. And so the more you do it with one, it becomes easier to do with the next, and easier with the next, and easier with the next. And so by practicing the oneness with the plant, you're kind of practicing oneness with your soul. You're practicing how to be one with the divine, because that's the issue. And that's the issue that you could say is a little bit hard to talk about, is that when you start to have a degree of oneness with something that's very divine, usually your physiology, you have this amazing experience, but then your physiology has like a bounce back, and can cause it can cause you to be incredibly self-conscious, is the best way to say it. You just become super self-conscious of like your issues, and you're in the process of letting them go. And like when you get really self-conscious about it, you could get attached, you could get defensive of it, rather than just going, this is part of the form, I'm just letting it go, right? Because like in a way we kind of over identify with the form, you could say. And so by going through and doing this process with plants, it's like you're practicing it so that when the time comes for the divine aspect, or we're working with an angel, you can go there easier without having the hesitations that your physiology brings to the table. Because the physiology, like to experience the divine, feels very much like the death process, the dying process. And in a way you are dying, but not how the body thinks. There's parts of your personality falling away, there's parts of old traumas and things that are falling away, but your body has identified with them. And so as you go through and you do this practice, it is a very devotional practice is not the right way to say it. It's a very it might be the best way to say it. Like devotional is the right way, but devotion implies like mimicking the divine, where this isn't so much mimicking it, it's having a degree of oneness with it. You're allowing for there to be change or transformation, or even more so, you're cultivating the potential for like transfiguring the personality, or transfiguring even the incarnated soul, and eventually transfiguring even bigger things. And so you're trying to establish a form of change through your experiences of of life or being human, but it's not something that we do naturally. It's something that we do naturally from the perspective of the soul. It's not something we do naturally from the perspective of the body. And we have to really acknowledge that we're driven more by our physiology for a while than we are by the soul component. Even somebody who's very, very developed, they're developed because they harness the physiology and make the physiology an ally rather than thinking I'm beyond the physiology. You just acknowledge this is the issue and then you address it. So you see spiritual teachers that come in, especially in the Buddhist tradition, they'll go spend like 10 years in a cave. They're changing their physiology, making their physiology an ally before they go out and start doing what they're needing to do, rather than just wrestling with their physiology all the time. And so you could say this is a really super deep form of healing, because even when we have a health issue, it doesn't necessarily mean that something bad is happening or something bad that we've done. It's like sometimes it is like a learning process for the soul to go through and like learn certain skill sets, you could say. And so a very great, a very gentle way of being able to do that is to do it with plants or with stones. And so when we were doing, excuse me, when we were doing the process yesterday, you put your awareness on the front heart. That has more to do with integration. And then you move it to the back heart. That has more to do with transmutation, right? And then it starts to break down the boundaries. And it's not like boundaries like how we would think of like in an emotional situation or in a relationship or something. It's more like your inner boundaries. Like, I'm only willing to go so far. You could say like a deeper version of this aspect of boundaries in the back heart is the more that you stretch those boundaries or even break down those boundaries, the greater your potential for expansion of consciousness. You deepen your ability to expand consciousness outside of the body and also within the body. And so even by going through and working with plants or stones in this way, you're doing the front heart, you're doing the back heart, you're already practicing the mechanisms, right? Because the back heart a lot of times is so congested and so kind of rigid in what it does that a lot of times it doesn't go there unless you like teach it how to do that. And so like it has the potential, but it does it like in small doses, not in big doses, right? And so you go back and forth, and then you put your awareness on the front and back at the same time, right? Your awareness is even amounts on the front heart and the back heart. And as you start to do this, you're integrating and breaking down boundaries all at once. You're transmuting and breaking boundaries and starting to have a bit of expansion of consciousness. So even if you just did that component, it's a substantial practice. When you are integrating like a deity where you're looking at the image and you're looking up and you're looking up, at first it integrates and then eventually it gets to the back heart. That's where the deeper effect happens, is when you get it into the back heart. So if you manually hold it in the back heart, it really literally starts to break down the boundaries you have towards the deity, right? Or to the teachings of that deity even. And then as you go through and you harmonize the two, it just starts to be able to where you take things in and then you're breaking it down almost simultaneously. So by doing this for a period of time, you're starting to generate a level of degree of oneness. So, a lot of times when we do meditations on the Blue Pearl, you're stimulating that process of the mental seed or the inner eye, where you're starting to have a level or degree of oneness. But then over a period of time, it becomes a little bit of a stumbling block because you're having to focus on that to have the experience. And at some point, the focus becomes the difficulty. Like you can't maintain it with focus. You have to shift to awareness. And so you have to be aware of that state. And so the deeper level of oneness is actually this harmony, you could say, or union between the front heart and the back heart. as you do that, it actually produces an activating effect to the blue pearl, also known as the inner eye or the mental permanent seed, and you start to experience a degree of oneness, which means you're bringing the light into wherever you direct your attention, be it other people in your life, in your situation, into your body, into your emotions, into your mind. And so it's a way of maintaining a state of oneness, or experiencing a state of oneness, and the expansion that goes along with it. Then when you shift from front heart, back heart, where your attention is like even, and you kind of go into the center of the body, you're starting to put your attention literally on the physical heart. And within the physical heart is the physical permanent seed. It's in the SA node of the heart. You don't really need to know that. I don't know why I said it. So it's in the physical heart, and you could say the physical heart is tied to how at odds you are with the environment. Yes, there's physiology and everything, but when you really boil it down, like you hear devotional practices where they say, I give you my heart, or my human heart I give you, or some form of that. It's in some of the kirtan songs and things like that, and you see the idea of the sacred heart in the Christian tradition, and in the Native American tradition, there's a lot of focus on the physical heart. In the Buddhist tradition, you see deities that are holding a physical heart sometimes. And it is literally like kind of by putting your attention and awareness on that in these states, it kind of changes the nature of the physical heart to diminish the tendency to be at odds with things in the environment, and it increases the potential for you to let things in. So again, going back to this item, this is like an old Japanese dorje. It doesn't have the little prongs around it, but it's still a dorje, right? And so like if I take this and I'm like blessing like a person or a situation, or blessing the earth in meditation, there's a certain amount of energy that comes through this, but there's also a certain amount of thought forms that accumulate on this because of this unconscious resistance to the divine, to the soul, to the higher nature, and even to the item itself. And so, in Astara, we use the mantra Lingha, and that actually reduces that tendency. It reduces the tendency to be at odds with something. But and it also would clean things off the item, by chanting Lingha over the item. But the reason that those thought forms are being generated by and accumulating on this is the lack of oneness that we have with the item, right? The more that we have a oneness to it, not only do we not have the resistance to the item, but the item then begins to impact us. And you could say the energy of it is used by the physiology, your emotions, and your mind for, higher practices, higher functions. Like it could be, it depends on what the item is. And so this is the whole idea with certain forms of alchemy, is you sit and you have oneness with the item, right? You have oneness with the item so that the imagery can come in and start to stimulate the intuitive mind. And if you look at the idea of clairvoyance isn't something where you just go, oh, I look at it and I see the energy around it, whatever. Like if I'm clairvoyantly looking at this, yes, I'm trying to see the energy around or whatever, but part of what's happening is there's a certain energy coming from me that then kind of mixes with the item and brings back information to my brain and to my forehead that can process the information that this is presenting, what is about this item, be it its history or its makeup or whatever it is. And so the art of practicing clairvoyance is even tied to this art of the alchemical processes of trying to have like a degree of oneness with an item. When you clairvoyantly are looking at something, your energy is mixing with the item and bringing information back. So you're already starting to practice a certain degree of oneness. So these things are all things that are overlapping, where you're trying to get information from things in the environment and letting it affect you. So again, going back to the developed soul is putting themselves in the right place at the right time because of the information that it gathers from the environment and from the earth. And if you look at the idea of the prophets back in ancient times, you know, when there was the school of the prophets back in the day, you know, you still see some lineages of prophets like in the indigenous cultures and things, but it was the ability to do what we're talking about with the item, but they were doing it with earth. Like they were literally having a sort of union with the earth and gathering information from the earth, and then they could prophesize what was happening at the moment, or what was happening in the future, or what was potentially going to happen. It was all about having a certain degree of oneness with the earth and the planetary logos, or the aspect of God associated with the earth. And so you know, we're not trying to do like a super deep spiritual practice, at least not at this point. I mean, it's deep, but you could go much deeper with this practice of practicing alchemy like this. But I'm about to open up another can of worms, so let me think about this properly.
Greg, that was what I wanted to know.
Okay. Yeah, just tell me when to stop because I can go.
I